Time magazine called him the unsung hero behind the internet. CNN called him a father of the internet. President Bill Clinton called him one of the great minds of the information age. He has been voted history's greatest scientist of African descent. He is Philip Emeagwali. He's coming to Trinidad and Tobago to launch the 2008 Kwame Ture lecture series on Sunday, June 8th at the JFK Auditorium, UWI St. Augustine, 5 p.m. The Emancipation Support Committee invites you to come and hear this inspirational mind address the theme, Crossing New Frontiers to Conquer Today's Challenges. This lecture is one you cannot afford to miss. Admission is free, so be there on Sunday, June 8th, 5 p.m. at the JFK Auditorium, UWI St. Augustine.
Thank you very much. I'm Philip Emeagwali. The computer is the greatest invention of the 20th century. Parallel processing is the biggest advance in the history of the computer. The history of civilization is the history of technology. Fire is man's first invention, or rather, man's first discovery. Who domesticated the first chicken? Who domesticated the first goat? Who rode the first horse? The names of ancient scientific pioneers are lost in the midst of time. Who solved the first quadratic equation? Who programmed the first ensemble of processors that led to the discovery of the modern supercomputer that computes in parallel? Parallel processing, the technology that makes the new computer faster and makes the new supercomputer fastest, is the most important invention in the history of the computer. The experimental invention of the massively parallel processing supercomputer that solves many problems at once instead of solving only one problem at a time, and its absorption into new computers and into new supercomputers is one of computing industry's most hopeful narrative. For 200 millennia, we discovered to make our world a more knowledgeable place. We discovered to discover new fields of study. The new field of study that I discovered in the 1970s and 80s is called massively parallel processing supercomputing. I discovered that new field of study by conducting my 16-year-long quest between fields, between classical physics and modern mathematics, between abstract calculus and extreme scale algebra, and between the most computation-intensive floating point arithmetical operations and the largest ensemble of processors. The supercomputer is a witness to humanity's most computation-intensive problems. The supercomputer doesn't just solve the toughest problems in extreme scale computational physics. The supercomputer is the modern divining rod for discovering more crude oil and natural gas. The supercomputer is the crystal ball for foreseeing otherwise unforeseeable global warming. The supercomputer is an instrument for telling the future. I discovered that the global circulation model that is executed across a new internet, that's a new global network of commodity processors or a new global network of as many computers, and that emulates a new supercomputer, can be used to gaze across the centuries. The invention of how to compute in parallel was a revelation that changed our knowledge of how to compute things that were previously impossible to compute. In the 1980s and earlier, the big overarching question in supercomputing was, can an ensemble of all the slowest processors in the world outperform the fastest supercomputer and change the way we look at the modern computer? For the 15 years onward of June 20, 1974, that parallel processing grand challenge question kept me up at night. In the final days leading to my experimental discovery of massively parallel processing supercomputer, a discovery that occurred on the 4th of July 1989, I had my heart in my throat. I had the visceral feeling that my massively parallel processing supercomputer results will be historic. That invention of the massively parallel processing supercomputer is the reason 12-year-olds are writing school reports titled "The Contributions of Philip Emeagwali to the Development of the Computer." On that 4th of July 1989, the first direct measurement of the fastest computation ever recorded across an ensemble of processors was recorded. On that 4th of July 1989, I experimentally discovered that massively parallel processing supercomputers can be used to solve computation-intensive problems that neither sequential processing supercomputers nor vector processing supercomputers can solve. My invention was about making grand challenge initial boundary value problems of extreme scale computational physics that are impossible to solve possible to solve. I figured out how to massively parallel process the most computation-intensive problems arising in physics and how to massively parallel process them so that a time to solution of 30,000 years can be reduced to a time to solution of just 1 day. My contribution to physics is this. Before I figured out how to harness the power of the massively parallel processing supercomputer that occurred on the 4th of July 1989, the most extreme scale computational physics codes were only executed on only one supercomputer. After my invention, the most extreme scaled computational physics codes were only executed across millions upon millions of commodity off-the-shelf processors.
insightful and brilliant lecture.